Welcome, everyone. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to post anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet it or repost it. And once again, welcome. My name is Leah Cruz, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation. We did want to take a moment before we begin, to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but it also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insight, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. So thank you. Before we get started with the webinar, I did want to go over a few housekeeping things. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please, if you've not already done so, in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select everyone so that we all know who's here, and feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement both through the chat box and by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond live to the questions you post, and our panelists will be typing out responses to some of those throughout the conversation as well. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any slides, bios, resources, or anything mentioned during the webinar, will be shared in a follow-up email for anyone who is registered. And lastly, we'll be having a brief on-screen evaluation that will happen twice during this particular webinar. So there'll be a short one at the beginning, and then we'll have one at the end as well. So just be on the lookout for those. They're very short, very quick, and we highly encourage you to respond. It really helps us with our commitment to you all during the webinar and our commitment to continuous improvement. And one last thing before we start, we do have 3 more webinars coming up before the end of the year. So we have a Crucible of Practice Salon next week on the 10th. And that is the intersection of progress and practice, actualizing the science of reading. That's with Moonshot Moment out of Indian River County in Florida. And then we'll also have on that same day in the afternoon at 3, we invite you to come learn stories and insights that highlight effective practices, resilience in the face of setbacks, and emerging opportunities to fuel student growth in the ongoing quest to recover learning post-pandemic. And that will be another learning loss recovery challenge. And then on the 17th, we will be talking about private equity in childcare and the effect that is currently having on affordability, access, and quality of childcare for parents. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for anybody who wants more information on these and for registration. And joining you now is John Gomperts. He is Executive Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And I will turn it over to them. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks so much, Leah, and welcome to everyone. I hope that everybody got to spend as much time as possible with as many of the people who you had hoped to see over the long weekend. We are back live, and as Leah indicated, ready for some lively and valuable sessions as we close out 2024 and prepare for 2025. As you all well know, the campaign is all about supporting coalitions and organizations working on early school success in communities across the country. And we work with those partners and funders who support the work of those coalitions. At the center of our work lie a series of strategies that we believe are core to meeting the challenges associated with early school success and equitable learning opportunities. What's particularly exciting for us about the discussion today is that it is based on the marriage of two of the big ideas that have been at the heart of the campaign. One is the centrality of attendance and the importance, and the other is the importance of positioning parents as partners, as essential partners in the learning, development, and well-being of young people. Today's webinar is devoted to seeing how those two ideas are coming together at the national leadership level and at the community level through smart strategies and even through technology, another area of emphasis for the campaign. In addition to our focus on a set of key strategies, you also know that the campaign has always chosen an attitude of relentless optimism about the possibility of real progress. Look, we're taking on a dead serious problem, early school success, especially for kids who are growing up in economically challenged families and in historically marginalized communities. And we're dead serious about how persistent the learning gaps have been and how wrong that outcome is. Nevertheless, we're resolute in our optimism, in our belief that large-scale progress is not a fantasy, it's not a pipe dream, but in fact, it's within reach. With the right community demand and support, with the right kind of work and the right willingness to stick to the work over time, we can do this, and we must do this. That's why we keep coming back to promising ideas and examples of success that can fuel our spirit and focus our efforts. That's what the whole LEO webinar series is all about, delivering hope, sharing useful information and ideas, and providing tools to support the work of the community coalitions that make up the leading edge of the campaign. We hope to do exactly that today with this conversation about the ways in which deep and meaningful family engagement can help to ameliorate the challenges around everyday attendance, and some approaches to successful family engagement that specifically help with attendance. So we've got just the right folks for this conversation. We start with two old friends and partners of the campaign, Hedy Chang and Bibb Hubbard. Hedy's from Attendance Work and Bibb Hubbard leads Learning Heroes. And after a conversation with Hedy and Bibb, we'll be joined by Shadae Harris, the former Chief Engagement Officer with Richmond, Virginia Public Schools, and Emily Bailard, the CEO of EveryDay Labs, a technology company focused on helping to improve attendance through technology-assisted family engagement. It's an all-star group on a crucial topic. So let's get into it. Hedy, can you join?
Hello.
Hello, thanks for joining us. I think you and I have been talking about attendance for more than a decade now. And as I said a moment ago, I'm so psyched to see these two pillars of the campaign, attendance and parents as essential partners, coming together. I'm curious, as someone who's dedicated so much time to studying and improving attendance, I want to hear in a second why you're embracing this idea of deep family engagement as a key part of the solution. But let's start here. We just had a lot of turkey and a lot of family time, and we took naps on the couch, and we did all those things. And we need to be relocated in the conversation for just a moment in this conversation about attendance. Can you give us a little sense of the current state of play?
Yeah, I'll do this pretty quickly, but lots of people know chronic absence pretty much nearly doubled during from before the pandemic to about 30% at that all-time high in 21, 22. We now have national data that shows it's starting to come down in 22, 23. And if you go to the next slide, you can see it's starting to come down a little bit further. And this is actually an issue that many states, this is an important thing, are adopting and working on. And a lot of states are starting to see some continued decrease, but it's still really elevated. And what I want you to see as we go to the next slide is one of the things that we've been seeing in this state of play is while we are worried about certainly the kids who are chronically absent, we also have to worry about how these really high levels of chronic absence, like once chronic absence affects 20% or more of kids, and we're still well above 20% nationwide, it's not just the kids who are chronically absent who are affected, but all the kids in the classroom that can be affected, because it makes it harder for teachers to teach, kids to learn, and it can even make it more likely that kids will become chronically absent if you have a lot of churn that's affecting the ability of the classroom environment to be engaging. And then if you go to the next slide, really quickly, I just want to keep, because we are the campaign for grade level reading, and we think about what happens with our youngest learners. Chronic absence starts really high. This is a challenge that starts high. And, this is a point in time, but I actually think a lot of the kids who then show up in the later grades are the kids who got better a little bit because it got easier to get to school when kids were a little bit older. But then because they fell behind, they weren't reading, they weren't engaged, then we're actually losing them in high school.
Let's come back to that in a minute, Hedy. I've got some questions about that as well, but keep going.
So the one thing I want people to think about, and this connection to engagement is part of this, but if you look at the next slide, what really happened during this pandemic is that, and this might have been a problem for some kids, but now it became a problem for lots of folks. We eroded the positive conditions of learning that make kids and families want kids to be in school. Families didn't trust school to be physically, emotionally healthy and safe. And while we're now 2 years out, we still have issues around this. Kids feeling bullied. School safety is still a huge concern. The sense of belonging and connection support. We still haven't regained that. And I'm not sure we're even still back to all the behaviors of connecting to each other. Feeling school is a place where your kids are going to be academically engaged. Making sure that adults, we still have teacher staffing challenges, teacher burnout issues. And this makes it all so hard to do that relationship building that we know is so essential. This is why that family engagement issue is so key. But if we don't engage families, we don't engage kids, we don't create the conditions that make them want to be there. And if we aren't in relationship to kids and families, if you go to the next slide, we can't find out we can't identify and address the causes that are making kids not be in school regularly. And there are some causes when we do talk to kids and families, we know are pretty big. In low-income communities, the marginalized communities that you're talking about, the poor transportation, the housing insecurity, the now less access to healthcare, greater trauma is still there. This issue of whether kids are feeling anxiety, especially if they were missed out on scaffolded learning. Issues of disengagement or still misconceptions where their families, for example, think, oh, I can just make up for this online. When in fact, kids need to be in school more than ever to develop those social emotional skills that really will help them thrive in the classroom and eventually in the workplace. So I think one of the things that we're really seeing as a country is we're starting, because the good news, John, we want to keep that optimism, is it's starting to decrease. And that's because people are starting to intentionally identify and address some of these causes. We made sure that kids and families are starting to feel healthier and safe and get access to healthcare on schools. We've made sure that families actually know more about anxiety so they can actually address that. We've started to, lots of places doing really intentional engagement of families. And it's when we invest in those things that we actually see turnaround happen.
That's fantastic, Hedy. Let me interject here. Anything, anything special about this moment? I mean, we're in sort of a confusing moment of change, and in some respects politically, nationally, but other respects at state levels and local levels, maybe not so much. I just want to check in with you about whether there's anything special about this moment, you see.
So first of all, at this moment, we more than ever need to see this as a bipartisan, and let's wait for the next slide. I'll go there for just, you can keep it on the other slide, that there's a bipartisan consensus that we have to identify and address the reasons kids are chronically absent, and that we can cut chronic absence. And one of the things that you might have known, I should have put a slide on this, but we worked with AEI and Ed Trust to announce, to challenge everyone to take the 50% challenge, reduce chronic absence by 50%. Let us get at least back to where we were before the pandemic, because we know that's so important for all our kids to learn. And what we saw was 14 states plus Washington, D.C. across the country adopt this. This is not a, a red or a blue issue, this is something that we all can care about. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things I think we need to think about is schools are such a critical place for our democracy. Schools are where we learn about each other, where we learn to find common ground with people who are different from ourselves, where we learn to understand how to talk to people and understand the realities. And I think this actually starts with attendance, John. Kids miss school every day. What happens when a kid's miss school? Does the interaction between the kid and family make the family feel more sense of belonging and connection, or does it alienate them? And that means we need to not treat attendance as compliance, but as an action alert. Like if a kid doesn't show up to school, that means we need to deepen engagement. That when kids miss school, we don't start with judgment. We think this is a sign that we need to build relationship. We don't start with blame, but we say, hey, I don't know what's going on. Something's amiss. I got to find out and start to solve problems. That is, and when we do that with this very daily occurrence of attendance and absence, that's when we can re-engage students and families and make sure we create school communities where we learn to honor each other, support each other, and make sure that we all are in those conditions that allow us to thrive and succeed.
So Hedy, and we're having a whole conversation today about attendance and deep family engagement, or parents as partners in the endeavors of their children's learning, development, well-being. Is there something in this moment? Why are you leaning in to this partnership with Bibb, as well as and Learning Heroes, as well as the partnership with AEI and Ed Trust around why family engagement as a key approach right now?
So first of all, that slide showed chronic absence starts at high levels when kids are in kindergarten, pre-K. The key is a partnership with families to make sure kids, and families feel like school is a place that wants them, where they sense of belonging, connection, community. But also, if families are experiencing challenges, a 5-year-old is not going to be able to tell you what's going on. Their parent, however, to whom they're dependent on, to get to school, that's the key partner, so that we can help parents see that we care about them, want to be in partnership with them. We'll stop and listen to them, create that connection, and then jointly and collectively solve the problem. And as Bibb will talk to you about it, that's a proven recipe for success.
Gotcha. Let me ask one last question before we bring Bibb into this conversation, which is, which kids are we talking about? Who's most likely to be chronically absent?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, chronic absence doubled for everyone. So one of the things is that this has become an even more common concern. Mm-hmm. But the kids who are disproportionately affected by chronically absent by chronic absence are kids living in poverty. Chronic absence has always followed the contours of poverty. Because if you have challenges with housing, transportation, safe path to school, it makes it more difficult to get to school, and it makes it more likely you face those barriers multiple years in a row, which then also affects the engagement of that kid and that family in that school. So it's communities struggling with poverty or who've historically been marginalized, who don't actually feel like schools are places that they trust, that they're sure that when they, in a way, when you send a kid to school, that's an act of faith. It's act of faith that, when my kid's there, this is going to be good for them.
Yeah.
If you don't believe that, if you don't know what's happening in school, if you don't feel that this is a safe place for your school where your kid's going to be treasured and supported, then there's going to be a lot of reluctance, and it shows up in the attendance.
Gotcha. If we can go back to that slide of the grades, what we have is sort of high on younger kids and high on older kids. What accounts for this dip in sort of fourth, fifth grade? And is there anything we can learn from what happens in those years where there's lower absenteeism?
Well, I think the dip, I think it is connected more to the fact that kids can now get to school by themselves.
Yeah.
As well as kids are less likely to be as sick,
Gotcha.
And I think, so I'm not sure where the lessons come from are more the places which have been able to have lower levels of absenteeism in those grades which have been traditionally high. I think that's where you really gain the insights.
Gotcha. Thanks. That's so helpful. Terrific groundwork. Now I'm going to ask Bibb to join us from Learning Heroes. And I think folks saw that we posted a little poll just to get a sense of what's going on in your community. So if you can fill that out, that would be really helpful. And we'll try to refer to those responses in this conversation. So while you're filling that out, I will tell you that I've known Bibb for about 1 million years. We've been having this conversation since February 1997, exactly. She's a fantastic leader in this space and has occupied a variety of positions and ultimately started Learning Heroes and has been a tremendous leader in this space. So you've been focused on family engagement for years now. And we've had lots of conversations about the qualities of deep family engagement and how it contributes and what the barriers are and so forth. But now you're bringing together this idea of deep family engagement with the challenges around attendance. And I'd love to see how you hear how you see that connection.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And just, to shout out to John. He was an instigator of Learning Heroes in the way back machine. Our early conversations helped shape the ideas that I had. And that was 10 years ago, John. So pretty amazing. So thank you for your inspiration. So yes, just to take a quick step back, we've been doing parent mindset research since 2016. And we found, sadly, in 2016, basically the same data that we see in 2023, which is that almost 9 out of 10 parents, regardless of race, income, and education level, believe their child's at or above grade level in both reading and math. And I am sure that everyone on this webinar today is aware of all of the data. So this is NAEP data, but you could look at ACT data, you could look at SAT data, you could look at MAP data, on and on. We don't sadly have 9 out of 10 students who are performing at grade level. So for us, this was a symptom of a bigger issue, a bigger challenge in the space. And so we wanted to understand why. Why is there this misconception. And if you can go to the next slide, please. What we found out was it was pretty simple, which is parents are relying on report cards as sort of one of their primary indicators of how their child is achieving, because it's really the primary form of information that they get. And to a parent, a good grade equals grade level mastery, because mostly it's not an expectation for teachers, A, to share what grade level children are performing at, and B, to let families know that a good grade has a lot of important components, but not necessarily grade level mastery. So if your fourth grader is bringing home an A or a B in fourth grade reading, that means they're turning in their assignments, they're asking good questions, they're doing the work, but they might be doing the work of a child who reads at a second grade level. So not a fourth grade level, but parents don't understand that. So as we think about absence and absenteeism, I think for us, this is just an indicator that, it has so many multiple downstream negative consequences. And I think attendance is one of them. So if your kid is doing fine, you're like, well, if they want to stay home an extra day, or we want to take a vacation, or whatever the rationale is, or, there are, true barriers too, like transportation and sickness is real. But if you also think that your child can afford to take that extra day, those extra days start to add up. But again, your child is still bringing home A's and B's. So you think, hey, whatever I'm doing is working out okay. So for us, we spend a lot of time around what Hedy was speaking about, which is building relationships between schools and homes. So the work of Learning Heroes is strengthening relationships between schools and homes to advance student learning and well-being. So very much an instructional strategy, not just the science nights, the carnivals, which are wonderful cultural enrichment, but not necessarily what we're talking about here. And so we're studying the role of family engagement and the outcomes that we can point to as a result of strong family engagement versus weak family engagement. So looking beyond just achievement, right? So actually in Illinois, we have partnered with TNTP to look at some longitudinal data that comes out of the state of Illinois. So there is a survey that has been conducted over the past 10 years annually, and teachers respond to this survey, and it's called the 5 Essentials. And one of the 5 essentials is family involvement. And so we looked at the family involvement score of schools across Illinois pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we looked at the outcomes of those schools who rated themselves highly in family engagement. So they were in the 90th percentile around family involvement versus the schools who rated themselves poorly at more of a 10th percentile of family engagement, which we call, and you can see the slide here, weak family engagement. And what we found, and there's a lot of other data, so I think they're going to put this into the chat. It's not that just the Go Beyond Grades resources, it's the family engagement impact study. If you could pop that in the link, that would be great. But what you can see here is pretty astonishing. The schools with strong family engagement had much lower chronic absenteeism rates post-pandemic than the schools with weak family engagement. It is common sense. It totally makes sense, but it's really good to have the data that shows pretty dramatically the schools that pointed to themselves as having strong family engagement had demonstrable better attendance rates, as defined by chronic absenteeism, but also attendance rates. We also saw that their achievement rates were stronger, their test taking rates were stronger. So then this was just our phase 1. So we're now engaged in phase 2, where we'll look at what were the strategies that these schools were deploying, so we can better understand, what is that secret recipe and how do local contexts come into play. And really interested to hear from Shadae later around her work in Richmond, which is just an incredible example too. But so anyway, so these are some of the the data points that show us that building relationships is critical in improving school outcomes, student outcomes, community outcomes.
That is fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about the research on that'll help us understand what practices were being employed and seem to produce these results.
Yeah, so we are literally entering our phase 2 where we're identifying schools in Illinois to go in and sort of, look under the hood, talk to teachers, talk to families, talk to students, principals, district leaders. What were the strategies that you were using that delivered these impressive outcomes? So how can we learn from that? And then ultimately we'll put together sort of a playbook, a guide map, if you will, of different kinds of strategies that different schools can use to within their own local context to be able to improve, those school environments. But I mean, some of the strategies that we know are, that are evidence-based and we're pretty sure are going to be ones that are pointed to, everything from home visits to, it is relationship building. So there's so much technology out there, which is really powerful and exciting and an important addition to this hard work of building relationships. But to my mind, you can't AI your way out of building relationships, right?
Right.
It's the hard human work. And so we've created at Learning Heroes several tools for how to do this. And in fact, there's one kind of document, our pedagogy, if you will, our belief system based in evidence called Unlocking the How, which is a roadmap for how to build relationships between schools and homes. So I encourage folks to check out Unlocking the How. There are 3 pillars. One is you have to build relationships grounded in trust, right? It has to start with trust. So the beginning of the year, introducing the teacher to the families and inviting the families to introduce themselves. We have a Dear Teacher letter, which is for those older people like us, maybe. It's a Mad Libs. I'm not sure if everyone knows Mad Libs, but it's basically a fill in the blank. Dear John, my teacher, this is what my child loves. This is what my child hates. This is what they're really good at. This is what is important to my family. So the teacher has a sense of who that family's culture and what all the assets that they bring into that classroom. So there are lots of ways to build those relationships. So grounded in trust is pillar number 1. Pillar 2 is it has to be centered in student learning and well-being. It has to be thought of as an instructional strategy. And then pillar 3 is around the policies, the practices, the infrastructure. School leaders need to put in place the time, the tools, the training for teachers, the expectations, those mindsets that Hedy talked about on her previous slide. Really important to be able to do this work holistically.
Awesome. Hedy, let me call you back into this. Let's take down the slide for a sec so we can see Hedy and Bibb better. Hedy, I'm just curious what you would add to what Bibb just laid out about family engagement, specifically with respect to its impact on attendance. And if there are findings that you have that are similar to what Bibb just shared from Illinois, that would be really useful.
I was thinking as you were talking about this, it's almost like change moves at the speed of trust. Attendance improves at the speed of trust. And so what we do know, and Bibb started talking about it, in Connecticut, they had the LEAP home visiting program, and that actually was able to reduce chronic absence or improve attendance by like 15 percentage points for the kids who had it versus the kids who didn't. And one of the keys was they didn't start by saying, hey, John, you've been absent. What's going on? That was not the relationship. It was, hey, John, starting in the summer, how you doing? Do you know about the resources locally that you can help with summer learning? Then coming back, it was a multiple home visit program. Hey, John, do you know who your teacher is? If not, oh, let me introduce you. Oh, you're worried about health issues? Let me find those resources. trust starts by having a communication that begins with getting to know people. And so I think that is really in keeping. But then I also think about some of the work that we saw. We actually looked in California, and this was actually specifically on kindergarten chronic absence. And this is with CCEE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And we were able to find districts that had better attendance than their peers, and they had even post-pandemic better attendance. And actually, I'll put a link to that. And there's also, we got Corey Turner, a NPR reporter, to come in and do interviews and talk about what you saw. And what I saw was an intentionality. I almost think that what happened with schools is, before the pandemic, we assumed trust. We didn't know we have to actually rebuild trust. And I don't think it's just the pandemic, but like in one of the schools that I was, or districts that I was at, was Livingston, California. With all of the school violence happening, it's not just the pandemic that's created distrust in school. It's the violence, the publicity of it, and the fact that we've now created schools where literally there are fences where families can't go onto a school site without being, all the IDs and the checking, and we've cut off communications with families. They don't even walk in and drop their kids off to a teacher like I did when my kids were little. And what I'm seeing is that in these schools, which they intentionally rebuilt that trust. They use everything at their, whether it's standing at the gate, in front of the gate, to welcome the kids when they walk onto school, whether it's how you use the apps, whether it's even how you pay attention to health issues. So let's say you know that your kids have peanut allergies. You're saying to parents, don't bring this, so they know you've paid attention to issues affecting your kids. It's creating buddy systems so kids connect to kids and help them feel safe going on to classrooms. But that requires planning. It's data plus relationships and positive engagement with families. So you rebuild relationships of trust that really work.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense to me, Hedy. And you keep saying trust and schools, which is obviously right. But I think we're also in a moment where trust in institutions, broadly speaking, in our society is down, and school is one of those institutions. So yeah, there are things that are particular about schools, but there's a general thing going on that people feel more skeptical about institutions that I suspect we used to take for granted. And they may be right in doing that. Go ahead, Bibb.
All right. I mean, so yes, I think in the macro, but an opportunity is the trust and that parents continue to place in their teachers. So just, that relationship, it's hard to do, but there is so much goodwill that's out there from a parent, mostly from a parent point of view, that, and from teachers, like we poll teachers, they know the role of families is so important. We poll families, they know how important, and they do trust their teachers. It's that how that is it is hard. But I think it's an opportunity, but we have to support the development and the ability to build those relationships. Going to Hedy's point, the intentionality behind it. And one just quick other data point. So 50CAN, a partner organization led by Mark Porter McGee, did a 20,000 sample survey of parents. And what we found, or what they found, sorry, it was like they shared the data, so I've internalized it. But that parents now are relying more on teachers to understand how their children are achieving than even grades. So that is a flip. So for 10 years, it's been grades number one, teacher communication number two. So not a huge flip, but a flip nonetheless. And an opportunity to be able to take advantage of the fact that teachers are now being looked at to do more in relationship with families. So we need to support them in the doing of that. So just a note, I think it's an opportunity, but it's also something we need to think about with the school leaders, because a school leader is critically important, ensuring that the teacher, again, has the time, the tools, the training, the support to be able to build those relationships. So I think, yes, the institution piece is hard, but when we get into the personal, there is opportunity. And I feel optimistic about that.
You know, Bibb, that was super smart to me. Like asking people to just have trust in abstract things called institutions that haven't done very well by them that seems like a fool's errand. Having trust in individuals who you can get to know, who happen to be part of institutions, is the way to build up. So, I mean, it reminds me of, hate Congress, love my member of Congress.
Right.
Hate the public schools, love my teacher. Okay, well,
Mhm.
let's trade on where people's energy are rather than try to, smash our head against the wall. So you talked about, so it raises all these questions of how, which is our good transition to Shadae and Emily, who will join us to talk about the how. And as Shadae and Emily join us on screen, Leah, I think you can post the results of the poll, which are quite interesting. Everybody identifies. Look at you can see here, 97% of respondents say it's a problem that's either serious or moderate. But as we go down, to what extent do you think your school district is taking on the challenge effectively? That is much less encouraging. And to what extent do you think your district or community is interested in investing more time and energy? Some say very open, some say somewhat open, and there's a significant part who just say slightly open. So we see some opportunities there, but we also see, I think, some barriers. So Shadae, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to have you. And we really, really want to hear something about the strategies, especially tell us about the work that you did in Richmond, Virginia, the parent partnership that you forged.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I would say we're using the word engagement, right? Like I've heard that multiple times. And one of the first things we had to do, especially as a division, is actually define what we meant by engagement. Because a lot of times, both when I was in Richmond, but also as I'm supporting divisions all across the country, when I ask them to describe their engagement efforts, they're not describing engagement. They're still describing involvement. So really quickly, we have to note the difference between the two. So when you're trying to involve families, you are leading with your mouth, right? You are telling families, this is how you can contribute. This is what we need you to do. That's involvement. That's not engagement. Engagement, you are leading with your ears. You are listening to families. You are trying to understand what are your hopes and dreams, right? What are your needs? And then you're working towards partnership. So that difference, again, between involvement and engagement, involvement is very much service-based, right? And my mom used to tell me, Shadae, you are a servant leader. This is what you do to serve. But the thing with involvement, if it's only about service, you're not working towards partnership. I can serve all day long and not get to partnership. If you want to engage, engagement has to be about partnership, John. And the biggest difference between service and partnership is with partnership, you have to share power. And that's really hard for people to do. So I think the first thing we had to do, and what I encourage people to do, is let's break down what we say when we're talking about engagement, right? Like, how are you defining it? Because it has to be about working towards that equal partnership. It can't just be about service. It has to be about listening to the hopes and dreams of our families because we value their wisdom and expertise.
You got so many
Sorry, go ahead.
hearts, and you got so many hearts going by on the screen and claps. Everybody's loving that, and I am too. That's fantastic. So how?
So the how. So we define it, right? So the next thing is you start by honoring history. So I've heard people say, like, our families are bringing their stories with them. Dr. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, right? She has this beautiful quote. She says, parents do not walk into our school buildings as individuals. They walk in as representatives of their families, their histories, and their aspirations woven in the tapestry of their children's lives, right? So if as a family, I'm walking into the building with all of those experiences, you start by honoring those experiences. And for many of our families, which I heard some people say, those experiences have been experiences where they may have felt undervalued, right? Uninvited to contribute. And in that moment, y'all, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to do anything but acknowledge it. And if we want to work towards healing, the first step in healing is truth. So we have to be able to tell ourselves the truth about the stories and our experiences that our families bring when they walk into those doors. And by acknowledging it, by listening with generosity, that's how you start that foundation. And again, not to fix it, but just to acknowledge that some harm has been done. And that starts you off on the repair process, on the healing process, which is a very conscious choice.
So let's get to that stuff is fantastic. Just 3 cheers for everything you said. And then I want to ask you, like, break it down for us. In Richmond, where you were the chief engagement officer, how did you do this? Because that's Hedy mentioned mindsets earlier. That's a mindset shift for educators and for everybody in that whole system, whether it's the people at the front desk or anybody in the school. That's a real change in orientation for them. So how did you do that? How did you
Absolutely.
and how did you help others live out those aspirations and those attitudes that you just described?
Absolutely. So the main thing was reframing attendance as an engagement issue. So we reframed it through an engagement lens because we didn't have an attendance problem, y'all. We had an relationship problem. It wasn't an attendance issue. It was a relationship issue. So we actually had to make that the thing. And when you center engagement and you're looking at the different practices, then you start to rethink the practices. So the first thing is you prioritize and you center relationships. So again, we took something like attendance officers. If the goal is relationships, the last person I want at my door is an attendance officer, right? Like if the goal is relationships, what we said is no, these are family liaisons. We need to redefine what those positions are. And their role became the role of bridging that gap with families, buffering that trust from the community to the school, supporting that work. But we took every aspect of attendance and we reframed it through an engagement lens. So there were no more attendance plans. There were engagement plans. Like language matters. So really thinking about every step that you're doing, if you can ask yourself what's at the heart of this, at the heart of the visit, at the heart of the phone call, is it to share information? Is it to tell you how many days you've been out? But if it's to build a relationship, when I call you, the first thing I'm asking you is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? Because my goal is in attendance, it's to build the relationship. As a result of that relationship, that's when we started to find out the root causes of what was behind the attendance. But we couldn't do that if they did not trust us. So more than just how many days you were out, we use every absence as an opportunity to understand the story behind it. And then when you understand that story, we could get to the root cause, but also acknowledge that no one else in the world has the wisdom and the expertise about that child other than their family. And to be able to just really just celebrate that every family has some capacity, maybe not every resource, but some capacity to do something for their child. Like there was a lot of value in that. And I will tell you, families will not go places they don't feel valued. Like you wouldn't go places you don't feel valued,
No
right?
way.
So when
Right.
you think about it, just that shift of being able to listen, to honor the expertise, to build that trust, that's what really started us to understand the root causes. And then through addressing the root causes, we started to see that chronic absenteeism go down. But more importantly than chronic absenteeism going down, we were building trust with families.
That is fantastic. I'm really curious, Shadae, in all this listening, as you sort of tumbled together everything that you heard, what were some of the key things that were going on for families, parents whose kids were not attending as regularly as the school district hoped they were attending? What are the themes that you heard repeatedly?
So one of the major themes that I like to highlight is that, so when you think about the pandemic, right? We told our families for 2 years, don't come to school. I mean, like we had the strongest campaigns to tell you, we don't want you here. Like literally stay away
Yes.
for
Yes.
2 years. And again, we put a lot of effort into those campaigns. So the complexity of determining like, okay, now like you're telling me why aren't you here, we realized that we had to have just as an effective campaign to let them know we love you here. And I remember I coined the term we love you here after talking to two moms who were like, Shadae, we don't believe you. Like we've been burned by the system. We just don't believe you. And it just made me think about like, okay, if we were sending those messages for like years, we need to have that same level of intensity to rethink our approach and letting all of our families know that we love you here. And that was a gap for a lot of families. They just didn't feel invited in to the process. Other things that we heard, and specifically, because remember, if you honor history, you're going to find out the specific context for your community. For the Richmond community, housing was a huge thing. You know, we had
Yeah.
an eviction crisis going on. So we were really able to hone in on like, hey, we have a lot of families who are in motels. It's considered stable housing. But what our families told us is, while I can pay month to month, I don't have enough for first and last month's down payment. So then we were able to prioritize partnerships, and we partnered with this amazing organization. We wrote an innovation grant for $500,000, and we used that money to give direct funding to families for their first month's and last month's down payment. And as a result of that, over 2 years, we're able to support over 130 families get into stable housing. And we feel not only did that support, like we're addressing the root cause, but you talk about sharing power, that's what it looks like, sharing resources. And then that built trust. Then word starts to spread, right? So those are things, once you get to the root cause, that you are able to address those issues, and that continues to really test your ability to actually share power, actually build resources. And then you start this little trust cycle because word is going to spread that no, they're consistent in what they're doing.
Shadae, you obviously are awesome and bring amazing energy. And at the same time, I bet you didn't do this all by yourself. So I'm curious for people who are listening, how did you create the context in which this was this family engagement, this deep family engagement that starts with listening? Superintendent, the mayor, like and what are community groups doing to create this kind of emphasis and focus and approach?
So when I first came to Richmond, there was no office of engagement. So I had the privilege with my amazing superintendent, Jason Cameras, to kind of create the first ever office of engagement. And again, you know, they tricked me because there was no office. It was like me and two people, but we were like, no, we got this. But what I remembered is I had the blueprint. And what I did is I used Dr. Karen Mapp's dual
Yep.
capacity framework for building strong school partnerships. Like that was our blueprint. And what that says is it talks about the challenges that a lot of us named, right? That disconnect sometimes between educators and families, because, you know, a lot of educators, I never had a family engagement course in my pre-service as a teacher, even as a principal. I never saw great examples of what that looks like. And as a result, people can develop deficit mindsets. And the same is true for families. But what that framework said is like, okay, if you're going to build this, what are the different process and organizational conditions that have to be in place? And because I knew it had to be systemic and ingrained, that is why it was important to have a chief engagement officer at a senior cabinet level, so that it wasn't this standalone thing that we could say, no, engagement isn't something that lives in this office. It has to be embedded in all aspects of the system. So it wasn't about embracing like certain engagement practices, but when you think about it, it had to be about like, how are we creating a system of engagement for sustainability? So it started with one, the organizational structure of having a senior position that was focused on engagement across the entire system. And then for us, we hadn't had a strategic plan. And I think when we first started, like 13 years. So as we did that strategic planning work, making sure that a priority was deep partnership with family and community. So how is it baked in the fabric of your system? And the strategic plan really did that. And then from there, we were able to be thoughtful about the different structures that would support engagement and the professional learning that every school leader needed. So we did these amazing engagement handbooks, right? Because we had to be very clear, one, what is engagement? And then what do we want to see, not just in one school, but across all schools as we do this work. So every school, they didn't have attendance goals, they had engagement goals. But your first engagement goal was decreasing chronic absenteeism, right? But when that went from just one thing to being an expectation across the system, that's how we embedded it. And this is not the work of one leader. This started with families at the center, an amazing, you know, superintendent who had a vision and let me run, but also strong, amazing school leaders who really led this work at the ground level. That's when it really started to move.
Fantastic. I want to come back to you, Shadae. Take a look. There are a couple of questions that popped up that maybe you can answer in the Q&A box. Now I want to ask Emily. First of all, I want to ask Emily's forbearance because it's taken a while to get to you. But this is going to be a great conversation. You've heard all of this about the centrality of relationships, really, here. And here you are, the head of EveryDay Labs, a company that's focused on using technology to enhance the engagement of families. So I have a million questions for you, but get us started by telling us a little about EveryDay Labs, your genesis and your current activities.
Sure, absolutely.
And thank you for your patience.
No, I think that we could spend an hour and a half with just Shadae, so I'm happy to, happy to wait my turn. Yeah, so at EveryDay Labs, our work is focused on partnering with districts like Richmond to, stay there, perfect. It's focused on partnering with districts like Richmond to help them put a comprehensive approach to attendance improvement into place. And we focus on really marrying family engagement practices with data and research. And so the way that we do that, and I should back up, we were founded by Dr. Todd Rogers, who's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, and inspired by Hedy, much like Learning Heroes was inspired in part by you, John. And we serve over 60 school districts nationwide and over 1.5 million students and receive data for all of those students. So we have a lot of data that we're able to use to do a lot of research. And our work with districts really focuses on helping to put 3 things into place. So number 1, providing data intelligence and collaboration tools. Number 2, providing professional learning. And then finally, providing evidence-based attendance communications, which are really about how and when to engage families at scale. And so examples of what those communications look like, they include things like chronic absence nudges and truancy notices, but also data-based targeted campaigns and individualized family support. So that's kind of in a nutshell. We're really
Gotcha.
about, yeah.
Gotcha. That's really helpful. You talk about using data and really behavioral science to craft effective communications. And I assume then, if you're using behavioral science, your work is animated by some core insights about how people think about attendance. So I'm curious what you're learning. What insights drive your work? What are the fears and motivators that are driving parental action? What's the information that they're finding helpful or unhelpful in supporting families to prioritize attendance?
Yeah, from a family perspective, I think, everyone on this webinar who works with families probably sees and experiences that, pretty much all families want their students to succeed, and that's universal, right? And so what we really see is, well, what gets in the way of that? And one of the things that gets in the way of that is not having the right information, right? Another thing that gets in the way of that is norms, as well as some of the things that Hedy talked a little bit about earlier. So, physical barriers to attendance, things like illness, aversion, etc. One of the changes that we've seen since the pandemic is that those providing families with information and really kind of getting at family beliefs is more critical than ever before, in part because barriers are higher for many students and many families, as well as because many families have a little bit more flexibility than they used to when it comes to attendance.
Yeah,
and so as a parent, if there's an adult in your household that has the ability to stay at home or maybe work from remotely occasionally, you're going to handle a whole host of situations differently. And so building the trust that, Shadae talked about, as well as Hedy talked about, is just really more important than ever before. And what we see, and one of the things that we see in the data is that excused absences, which are often illness-based, which is still the number one, kind of given reason for missing school, have stayed relatively constant. It's the unexcused absence category that has changed the most and grown the most.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. We're talking about relationships and we're talking about technology. And sometimes people think that technology is at odds, it lies in tension with having relationships. And sometimes we think it's actually a way to enhance relationships. And often if we stop to think, we think it can be both. If we think about social media and how easy it is to connect with people, but how thin that connection can be. I'm wondering how you think about at EveryDay Labs, how technology can be relationship enhancing rather than just more distancing or feeling like the veneer of a relationship, but pretty thin stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you asked. I think from our perspective, technology really plays 2 vital roles. So the first is, taking a step back, kind of big picture, one of the things that we see is that we see this in surveys, that 80% of staff time focused on attendance is focused on the more intensive interventions for the high touch work, right? For a small handful of students. But we know that, oh, right, exactly, kind of the top of the pyramid. But at the same time, we also know that that's not scalable to meet the levels of chronic absenteeism that we're at today. And so we often think about there needing to be a mix of high touch and low touch strategies to both engage families and build relationships, as well as to improve attendance and address chronic absenteeism. And so if you go ahead, actually, yeah, skip ahead a few more slides. I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. These are some of the tools that we have in place. Stop. Okay, stop right here. So
Perfect.
Most folks here are probably really familiar with some of these high touch strategies like home visits and family attendance conferences and mentors, for example. And these are really critical ways of building relationships. They also take a lot of time. And so one critical role of technology is to automate as much as possible, simplify as much as possible, so that your family liaison or attendance clerk or school secretary, kind of regardless of who it is at your school and in your district who's playing this role, your counselor, can, not spend their time pulling reports and trying to look at student lists to send out mandated truancy notices, but instead to really efficiently have the information that they need at their fingertips and automate a lot of family communications. We find that families still in this day and age, even though families are all getting lots of text messages from everyone, families still actually self-report that they're not getting the critical information that they need about their students. Families still underestimate the number of absences that their child has by a factor of 2. Families still, we see amongst families of chronically absent students, we typically see that anywhere from 10 to 20% of them don't know their school phone number and don't know who to reach out to for support. So some of those basic building blocks of putting in a relationship into place aren't there. And so technology helps with, kind of clearing the decks to free up time and ensuring that some of that basic communication is happening so that parents receive information they need, as well as technology can really help to coordinate and inform some of that higher touch work that, is about building relationships with families.
I love that answer. I just thank you for that, Emily. I worry about folks who want to appear to be doing something versus doing something, and technology can work either way. It can make, you can flood the zone with all these messages and you can pat yourself on the back, and we know that alone won't work. On the other hand, if you use it as something that automates boring tasks, repetitive tasks, and frees up time, and it manages to worm in the key informations with the right kind of tone, it can just be an enormously powerful tool, I think. So I love what you're saying, and I really appreciate that. I want to bring Hedy and Bibb back into this conversation now, if I can.
And I think we can
stay.
turn off the slides too.
Okay, let's turn off the slides for now. Great. Let us know if we need to come back to them. So Hedy and Bibb, you've both worked closely with schools and districts. You've thought about these challenges for a long time. And we just heard fantastic information from Shadae and Emily about some strategies and some tactics for improving connections between schools and families. I'm curious what your thoughts are, and this responds somewhat to the poll of the people who are listening to this session. What practical steps can districts take to make sure that family engagement is consistently prioritized as a strategy around attendance? Like, what's the right mix of pressure and support and tools that helps districts see oh, right, this is a key strategy. And Shade's got mad energy, but we can't spread her across 100,000 school districts in America, sadly. So I think that would even wear her out. So how do we get districts to see this and to act on it? And how can groups like those who are listening to the session today bring this to school districts as a core strategy? Either one, Bibb or Hedy, I see you both thinking.
I guess I could try start a couple things.
Great.
One is the problem with the districts is we treat everything so siloed. So family and engagement, they like don't even talk to each other in districts. One of the things that Shadae, I had the chance to follow her work while she was in Richmond. She actually used data to show that she could show that the more family engagement touches you had with a family, the better the attendance was. So districts can also organize their data systems so they're actually directly seeing the benefits and create dashboards that allow you to do that. The other thing I just want to, this was actually going back to a conversation. There's two things I might start with. One is that this notion of teachers, Bibb, that you talked about, and teachers being so essential to the core. But Emily talking about what we need to do is use technology so that we can leverage the power of teachers to communicate with families. If families get a text from their teacher, but the teacher does not have to personally enter every single text, that is like not, but if it's coming from the teacher and allows for two-way communications with the teacher, and if we use things, apps that make it come in your home language, you can make it, and you can pre-program text. You can make it easier for technology to be coming from teacher and being in those communications. And then we can actually use data to monitor how that family engagement is working to improve attendance and monitor which kinds of messages work. We have those systems in place, but we're not leveraging and using them. And we're not then creating that information so principals as leaders can look at that information to make strategic decisions about how to use the resources they have control over in their schools.
Excellent. You said you were doing that on the fly. That was pretty great. Thank you, Hedy. Bibb, you want to try to compete with that?
No, there's no competing with this
Hedy.
crew. I mean, or anyone on this team. So I'm just going to try and augment. But I mean, for us, the pullback is, to my mind, a mindset shift. And I think, the way Shadae talked about it, and thank you so much for just kind of cutting right to the chase. Seeing this as the goal is relationship in service of student learning and well-being, right? So that shared power, that co-creation, that relationship leads to a stronger school community. And so having that as a mindset, I think, is sort of a first step for a district, that every tactic that you're deploying, and Shadae asked this question, how is this building a relationship, right? What are we doing? How are we doing this in a way that's going to contribute to building relationships? So I think just even that one question is so powerful, just to check yourself. An attendance officer versus a family liaison is such a beautiful example. There are lots of tactics that come out with unintended consequences because you're not thinking about how they land, because the world of inside the school building, we use a lot of jargon, we move really quickly, but parents don't have the same vocabulary that a lot of schools have. And so there's a lot of, this happening. So I think just that gut check is super important, and thinking about engaging families, again, as an instructional strategy for school success is sort of the most important mindset that the district leader has to have in order for the school leaders to be able to do their work, for the teachers to be able to do their work, in collaboration and deep relationship with families. So that, Shadae, you're just now in my head. about that relationship lens. I just think that was such a beautiful way to say it. And then, yeah, there's a lot of, as Hedy was talking and Emily, like there's so many strategies and tactics that you can put in, but if you're not doing it through that lens, you're not going to see the same results.
So I see two levels. One is what you're just talking about is a particular approach, but there's a level before that, a gating thing before that, which is that you want to take the district decide you want to take affirmative action without even saying what that action is going to be. So we have a question from somebody who says, my district sends letters to families whose children are chronically absent, and they think I've done my job. So how can this person begin to nudge the district in the direction of actually you can do more, you must do more, to create that mindset? So Emily, you guys sell into districts.
Yeah.
Right? That's your job, is you sell into districts. Tell us a little about what you can touch in districts that make them motivated to act.
Yeah, this is such a good question that I imagine there are lots of folks listening who have the same challenge. The thing that I have found most successful is really framing attendance improvement as an academic support. So, really talking about the achievement gap is an opportunity to learn gap. And a big part of that opportunity to learn is being able to be present. And there is a lot of amazing data, some of which Hedy shared earlier, and that I'd be happy to share with anyone who sends me an email, that really shows the strong connection between absences and academic outcomes. And so I always start with that data, both within a district, being able to show that every absence leads to a decrease in ELA and math scores, as well as the flip side. So Shadae talked a little bit about the incredible successes that Richmond has had. That's not a standalone story. So for example, Cleveland Metro reduced chronic absenteeism by 27% over the last 2 years. And that has shown up in their academic success. They just met state academic report card standards for the first time as a district. Another example, Tempe Elementary, an 11,000 student district in a totally different region, right, in the Southwest. They, put this intentionality that Hedy and Shadae have talked about, and a lot of the strategies that we've talked about, and a mix of high and low touch strategies into place. And they reduced, chronic absence rates by more than 20%, and see that translating into improvements in test scores. So I think making that connection between attendance and academics is critical. Shadae, how did you convince everyone at Richmond that to put real resources against this, not just pay lip service?
And I think the reality is, everyone has different value propositions. Like, the goal can't be to convince people. The goal has to be building meaningful relationships. And I love what you said, Emily, but you have to tell the story. And for so often in education, we just don't do a good job of telling really simple stories. So we love you here. That's it. That's the story. We love you here. We want you here. But one of the things that we did is, instead of talking about yes, we were decreasing chronic absenteeism, but we reframed the story around what are you gaining? So at the end of the year, it was we gained over 90,000 hours of academic learning. For one elementary school, Fairfield Court Elementary School, that was 678 hours of academics that they gained, which broke down to almost 37 hours per day. So even just how you're talking about it can shift how people go from that shift Emily's talking about, from just like, not what you're just, yes, we're decreasing, but how do you tell that in a real palpable story to people to get them to understand what they're gaining? And it's because of the thoughtfulness, the dedication of families who may be making just invisible investments that you don't see. So that's why it's so important to redefine engagement, because it can't just be I'm coming to the school, right? Like it can't be that involvement. It has to be an acknowledgement of, every family has the capacity to do something, and then how are we celebrating it? But more importantly, like what's that story you're going to tell as a district, right? Like what's that one sentence that everyone's going to say to wrap around your beliefs of what you're going to do over the next 5 years to decrease chronic absenteeism? And co-creating that with your families will create a really powerful story that you can then get the community behind.
John, can
Whoa,
I
that
offer
was
two things?
fantastic, both of you. Yes, please. Let me just, yeah, go ahead. You go.
So one thing is, as you've just heard, there are places that are proof points that if you don't just send a letter, you deepen engagement, you'll get serious reductions. And sometimes you need a principal to meet another principal, or a superintendent to meet other principal, and they have to hear those stories, and that's what will convince them that this is a strategy. The second thing I just want to, and this is connected to some of the questions coming in the chat, we also have to look at the things that we're doing that are actually disengaging families. And the way we treat absences when they are unexcused, and the way we talk to families, the way we send out our truancy notifications are perfect examples of how we're alienating thousands of families, including middle-class families, who feel like they're getting unfair notifications, which show and prove to them that schools don't know who they are, care about them, or their kids. If we want schools to be places that everyone wants their kids to be, we have to stop doing the things that anger and alienate our families, starting with really legalistic blaming and problematic truancy notifications.
Plus
Well,
one.
okay. Yes, +1. Go ahead.
Yeah. And
Me too. +2.
John, if there ends up being time, I'd be happy to share an example of what Hedy just talked about.
Let's do
About
it.
how,
Do
okay.
it right. Do it
Okay.
right now. Let
Okay.
me just give you a little architecture. We have 10 minutes to go. We've answered some of the questions in the box, and we're going to continue to try to do that. I'd like to ask each one of you, Emily, you're going to go and give an example. I'd like to ask each one of you for one or two top takeaways from this conversation that you'd like those of us, those who are listening, to just keep in mind. And I have mine as well. And we'll end on that note. But before we do that, Emily, go ahead. That would be great.
Perfect. Can you pull back up the slides? I'm not sure what slide number it is, but if you just, I think, go right where you left off. Beautiful. Let's maybe go to slide 20. Oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, go one before this one. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Yep, 22. Beautiful. Okay, so I just wanted to share this because what Hedy was talking about is something that and there's some conversation in the chat about this, and it's really easy to get these letters wrong and send letters that are really kind of harming your family relationships. And so a typical truancy notice is super legalistic. It's written at a college reading level. It is, it's scary. And we actually find that 20% of readers often can't even tell that it's about attendance. So we really recommend doing a number of things when communicating about attendance. This is the playbook. Number one, explain why you're sending it. So in this example, oh my gosh, and Shadae, I didn't even notice this is a Richmond example. Many families tell us it is helpful to get updates about their students' attendance. This letter helps you track Casey's attendance. You may receive additional letters from the school. So you're explaining, why did you receive this? So it's not coming out of the blue. Another thing here is, if we can help with anything, call the school or see the resources on the back of this letter. And one of the messages here that you'll also see on the back is, we're here to help. So we find that it's really critical to pair the "we're here to help" message with the, your child has missed school and it is concerning message. And then other things that Hedy was talking about is, you don't want the tone to kind of be that you're yelling at the person. You really want the tone to be, that I'm concerned about your child's attendance. I'm here to help. And I would like to, engage with you, the parent or family member, about it. So if anyone would like to learn more, feel free to email me. I put my email address in the chat.
Thanks.
Just wanted to share some of those things.
Thanks so much, Emily. Leah, let's go ahead and take down there we go. Now here we all are. One or two takeaways that you'd like people to leave with. Bibb, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the big takeaway is, this is hard work. It takes intentionality, and it takes a mindset that's important around the goal of relationship building. And one of the things that we do, and we work with principals all across the country, we have a Leadership Institute, a principal coaching practice that's a year-long session, and we hear over and over again how challenging this work is in all of these different local contexts. So I would just say, one thing is, this is hard work, and there are folks out there, like, this is the work of Learning Heroes, where we can support, school leaders, district leaders, and teachers in how to do this work in the way that we've been describing today. So it does take intentionality. It does take focus. And so just, such a deep appreciation for the overwhelming response that folks have been contributing and taking this really seriously, because it is important, and it can be done, because there are lots of great examples where it's happening. So just appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you. Shadae, one or two takeaways.
So prioritize relationships. So even at the most punitive level, because I know some of you are asking, like, but what happens when someone's missing like excessive amount of absences? So again, the core is still relationship building. So one of the things we did is, the probably worst thing you could do to break relationship is to petition a family, right? Like, that's when you get to that last stage, you're taking a family to court. Even at that level, if the goal is relationships, we partnered with the juvenile justice system. We held the docket, like the real docket, at one of our middle schools, and we lined the entire gym with services. So the family would come up, would talk to the judge. The judge, instead of doing harsh disciplinary action, would order the family to go to every single service. They didn't have to use everything, but they had to visit. They had 30, 60, 90 days to improve attendance. And if attendance improved, the petition was dropped, right? So even at the most punitive level, when you prioritize and center relationships, even your interventions look different, right? So I think really prioritize relationships, honor history, and really, again, this stuff has to be anchored in love. And Bell Hooks said, you can't really know love until you surrender your attachment to power. So remember that definition between involvement and engagement, and that difference between service and true partnership.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shadae. Emily, one or two takeaways from you?
Yeah, I think that is a tough act to follow. I think my biggest takeaway is really to prioritize not just high touch work, but also low touch work. And there's lower touch versions of all the things that we're talking about. So for example, using the meet and greet moment at the school entrance as a low touch way of building some of those relationships with students and families who maybe you're not having attendance conferences with or home visits with. And then my second takeaway is you know that the right technology is the right technology because it's making your job easier, not harder.
That's a great. Hedy,
So
bring us home. Bring us home.
we talk about the pathway to change is you start with mindset. Then you get your data. Because if you don't have the right mindset, you won't use the data in the right way. Then you engage in your strategies, and that will get you to your outcomes. And it does. It takes time because shifting mindsets is not a one-shot deal.
That's really good. That's really good. My takeaway also has to do with mindsets and reframing away from a scold and attendance. Talking about attendance can sound like a scold, to an opportunity, and seeing that relationships, especially relationships with not just the student but the student's whole family, is a key to unlocking that opportunity. I love all that, and you all were absolutely fantastic. So I want to thank all of our participants, Shadae, Bibb, Hedy, and Emily, for a terrific conversation filled with great content. I want to thank again Leah for all the great work in the background, and Sierra for architecting this whole thing, and wish you all the best. I hope to see you again soon in one of these sessions. And with that, I'll leave it to you, to Sierra, to close us out.
And on that note, I'll thank you, John. Thank you for leading us through this great conversation. It's always great to have you as a moderator and leading us through and, engaging all of our panel. On that note, a very exciting note, during the holiday season, CGLR will be having a holiday rebroadcast on December 24th. So if you want to break away for a little more learning, we encourage you to register for that rebroadcast, which features both Hedy and John discussing supporting school attendance during a time of changing norms. So the link to register for that will be posted in the chat box now. And then really quickly as we close, just want to turn your attention to our upcoming webinars. Next week on the 10th, we have an exciting double header, starting off with a Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30 for a really sweet, engaging conversation there. And at 3 p.m., we'll have a session discussing student learning recovery. And then I did want to let you all know that the private equity in childcare session that we mentioned at the start of the hour was actually postponed to February. I apologize if I got your hopes up in advance, but we do encourage you to keep an eye on the GLR newsletter so that you can be updated when that session is announced, that official date. Until then, thank you all again for such an engaging conversation. Thank you to our panel and thank you to our attendees. Everyone was very engaged and so thoughtful and had some really great questions and conversation. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.